Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to give everybody probably like 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and get started just so our candidate has as much time as possible. So we'll wait just a minute or two so you'll see us, but we'll be muted, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. We need to sit down. They're not going to.
Can you just remind them to turn off the videos? I turned it off, but the people joined after their videos on.
Okay.
So just remind them.
Okay. So just a reminder to any of you who are virtual with us today to please not turn your cameras on. Part of it's because the Baltic is having some problems with their technology and it causes the TV, one of the large TVs in here, to flash the whole time. So I'm not sure anybody wanted to make a star appearance anyway, but if you did, if you could please wait till later and keep your cameras off, we'd appreciate it. Okay. So welcome everybody to the Boulder County Public Health Town Hall with our Deputy Director finalists. I am Catherine Palmer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Admin and Finance, and I will be conducting our town hall today. We have 7 questions and 1 intro question for our candidates. Our questions will focus on leadership, community engagement, health and racial equity, and workforce culture and expectations. To keep on track, we do suggest 5 to 6 minutes per response. And just so you know, we do have somebody in the back that will help you. We've also provided to our sheet of our questions to our candidate, so you have it for easy viewing. And then some of the questions were provided to the candidates in advance, some were not. So please feel free to take time to review, pause, and reflect. Most of the questions do have multiple parts. I will ask some questions and then staff in the audience will ask. If you're asking a question, please just remember to introduce yourself, use your pronouns and your title. Okay. And then a few reminders before we get started for those of you that are in the room. So we are in a hybrid setting, so please be mindful of the camera. The mic is incredibly hot if you've ever listened to our Board of Health meetings, meaning that any side chatter or noise happening, everybody will hear it. So if you need to step out, please feel free to. If you have not been in this room, which I think everybody has, the bathroom is in the hallway as well as water and refreshments. Please do remember to mute and put away your phones. Again, step into the hallway if you need to. We'll have a 15-minute break afterwards. And then the biggest thing is, most importantly, in line with our values, please set aside any implicit bias you may have had and listen openly and with intent to what our candidate has to share with us today. After today's town hall, you will receive a link to complete a feedback form. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. The very first one is just our introduction. So can you please introduce yourself and briefly tell us what interests you about this role with Boulder County and how your background prepared you for it?
Okay, thank you. It's good to see everyone who's in the room and those online. Thank you. I'm super grateful to be here. I do have a little bit of a cold, so I just want to preface that by saying I might have a little coughing fit, but I have my water. So my name is Indira Gujral. I identify as she, her, and I identify as biracial. So my father is an Asian immigrant from India who came over in the 1950s. My mom, and English is a second language for him. And my mom is the 2nd generation Irish immigrant. And so I grew up in the DC area. I lived in the Midwest for about 10 years. And then I moved to Colorado and went to grad school. I'm a mom of 2 kids, one of them who thinks that I am a human ATM, and is regularly seeking cash, but luckily they just got a job, so that's good. And I have a partner of 20 years, and I'm a Boulder County resident and live in the community. I'm an epidemiologist by training. I went to school up at CSU, did my master's, and then I was down with one of the economic downturns, and I said, gosh, I think I'm just going to go get my PhD because I'm good at being a student. So I went on and got a doctorate in epidemiology as well. I've worked in healthcare. I have worked in the state health department for about 6 years, which is a challenging place to work. My favorite spot is actually working here at Boulder County Public Health. I was introduced to this position as the division manager for communicable disease and emergency management, actually by Heather Matthews. Heather and I worked together at the state health department, and she kept prodding me to apply. And I didn't want to apply because it's so far. I lived in Denver at the time, but then I did apply, and I met this amazing group of people who were just awesome. And so I have spent 9 years here at Boulder County Public Health. I love it. I love the people. I love the culture. I feel like it's one of those really cool places where you can do really cool things. There's space to be innovative. And so that has kept me here for a long time. And then the last 3 years are probably the hardest in my career. That was managing COVID. We had a staff of over up to 100 people at one point. A global pandemic comes along once in a lifetime, and we definitely, as a team, learned a lot. We learned how to operationalize equity into our everyday work. We learned about being compassionate with ourselves. We learned about chronic stress and burnout and workload. And you take COVID, and then you take the Marshall Fire, and you take MPOX, and it's just a lot. So we definitely learned to figure out how to be highly effective with the resources that we had. So I would say that I feel that my background over the last 3 years in particular have definitely prepared us. We had to be very adaptable with the virus changing all the time. We had to pivot and change, and our goals and objectives, we would set clear goals and objectives for the year, and then we would have to pivot and change those objectives pretty much every year as the virus changed. And then the other piece that we did was we had limited resources, so we worked with the resources that we did have. Sometimes we had teams that had to move groups of people to take on different and new work. But I think the most important aspect of creating this high functional team was also around creating a psychologically safe environment. We have a pretty rich culture where we center on equity, and we also create an environment where we can bring our authentic selves to work, which I think is really important for us to make decisions. And we don't always agree, and that's okay. And I think that psychologically safe environment creates the ability for people to be authentic and human-centered. So I was curious. I went to Rye Hill this year, and they do these assessments, and I was curious how my evaluation would come back. But my evaluation actually came back pretty strong, and that people felt like I was modeling the way. I was creating a vision, empowering people to do their job, which is super important. And so I'm applying for this job because I feel like there's a lot I can bring to the whole agency to take that work that we've done in CDM and expand upon it and learn from it and grow from it. So thank you, Amanda. And that's it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, this next one has 2 parts. I will ask you both, please answer each separately, and I can go back to re-ask if you need it. You did receive this next question in advance, and it's been slightly shortened just for this space.
Yeah.
If you're appointed as deputy director, you will step into an agency with agreements around fostering trust, demonstrating compassion and respect, collaborating and building strong teams. We are also committed to being an anti-racist organization, which guides us to interrupt conversations or processes that are or may be rooted in bias. and proactively support racial equity. How in your role would you respond to and participate in positive disruption within our team? And how would you balance the need for agency cohesion and trust with the need to challenge each other in authentic ways? It's a lot.
Wow.
So I'm here to go.
I am just super grateful that I got this question in advance. It took a lot of actual thought to think through it, because it's a lot in there.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that. I would definitely say that when we are implementing practices to address oppression and discrimination, it's not easy. It's hard. If it was easy, we would be moving way at light speed, but it's not. It's very difficult. And I've been doing this work for a long time. I think this is probably one of the most challenging aspects of the work. I think it's important to recognize that it's really hard on people who have felt harmed, because they may have to speak up to power, or they may have to explain to a friend, like, or someone that they work with closely, that their words or actions have caused harm. I think it's really hard on the person who maybe is most likely not even aware that they have caused harm to hear the feedback that they may have caused harm. And so if we want to balance the agency, cohesion, and trust with the need to challenge each other in authentic ways, we're going to have to really focus on a pretty significant culture shift in the agency. And it has to be a culture that we embrace around learning and growth, and a culture of inclusion. And I just want to tag here that I only have 5 minutes to answer this question, but that in order to create this culture, we all have to have a really deep understanding of unconscious bias. We all have unconscious bias. We just don't even realize that we have it. And it is a tendency in human nature to create opinions about people or things without really truly understanding the facts, and you may unconsciously be doing that. So I think it's great in the beginning you talked about implicit bias and making sure that we're tapping into that, because it happens in every interview, in every interaction that we have. So how would I respond to and participate in positive disruption? Well, my vision would be to create a vision around inclusive leadership, which would definitely require a growth mindset and a culture of awareness and empathy. So if we think about it, inclusion today is probably one of the most important leadership traits that we have to bring to our work. We have a really awesome system in the county of creating inclusive hiring practices, and we're bringing a lot of diversity in. But if people don't feel welcomed and supported and included in a team, then we may not keep them. And I think we have seen that happen and occur within the agency. So, and that's just a human nature. As humans, we are driven to be around people like ourselves. We want to be around people like ourselves. And so if we can create more of an inclusive environment and be intentional about it, I do think that more people would speak up and feel more comfortable and bring their authentic selves and feel like they want to invest in the long-term relationship with this agency. So I see it, if we want people to show up authentically and create an environment that is psychologically safe, I think there's 4 steps. The first is to start with ourselves. I went through Rye Hill this year, and the best part about Rye Hill is just they give you time to be self-reflective. And I think that self-reflection is not something we give ourselves time to do very often because we're so busy. But I think we need to be able to take time for ourselves to work on what we want to work on, because we're all going to approach this from a different perspective. The second is I do believe that we should be engaging in constant learning and dialogue. We've been very successful in CDM with, after George Floyd's murder, Sheila helped to set up these once-a-month meetings where we talk about equity topics. So we talk about race and gender identity and sexual orientation. And then Kevin did one recently with Keith on intersectionality that was phenomenal. And it was just all the different intersections. And so it's just creating an environment where we can be vulnerable and really hear and learn and grow. And one of the best things I heard from someone on our team was that they felt like the meetings that we had were uncomfortable, but they felt like it was changing their perspective in the way that they did their work, and they were becoming a stronger ally for others. And I think that is like, makes me feel really good. The third step would be to make sure that we all are skilled at doing uncomfortable conversations. So the agency agreements that we have are great, but they don't teach you they tell you when, you might have violated an agreement or someone might have violated an agreement, but they don't really teach you how to actually have a conversation with someone. And so I think there's some more skills that we can do on there. I know community health has this great diagram with the comfort, discomfort, and alarm, and it's the little guy in a parachute and the alarm jumping off. That is something we could use. We can use the CCAR protocol that many of us have been trained in. And so I think as an agency, if we can get skilled at not only giving feedback, but receiving it, I think we're going to be in a much better place. So I do think that I just want to say lastly, we're not the only agency that is grappling with this. I think all agencies are, but I think we can create a culture of inclusion to be successful to do this. Thank you, Amanda. Sorry. Amanda's my timekeeper.
All right, this next question is a little bit about you and understanding you as a person. So it's a three-part. Again, I will ask all the questions separately. I can go back and re-ask if needed. So if we were given a manual on how to best work with you, what would it say? What would the section on working with you when you're frustrated or high stress say? And what would the section on your best day say?
Well, I want to start with the best day.
Yeah.
Because I think my best day would definitely be, I love being at retreats. I love doing happy hour. We go to lunch once a month as a division leadership team. I love being with people and engaging outside of work. So those are my best days, I think. I remember one time we went for a happy hour, usually at the holidays, and Chana, who used to work here, she said, "Oh my gosh, Indira, you're so much fun." And I was like, I know, but I'm not, people don't see that at work all the time. But those are, I think, some of my best days. They're more fun. I love having one-on-one time with people. In terms of what if you were given a manual how to best work with you, what would it say? So I love humor, Instagram reels, things like that. I always enjoy having a little humor. I can come across as pretty serious, and I am serious because I'm really committed to my work and I want to be successful and help the team be successful. As a leader, I feel like I'm very supportive. I'm empathetic if people have life things happening, they need to take time, and supportive in that way. I think I realized after going through this assessment with Raiho that I'm actually pretty good at recognizing others. I thought I was terrible about it, but I'm actually pretty good. And I think that it's important for people to feel awarded and feel that they're being acknowledged. So that's good. I would say also for me, I'm pretty direct. I'm definitely East Coast. So I do well with, direct, back and forth. That's good. And honesty is really important to me. The integrity component is super important. I would say I'm good with the good, the bad, and the ugly. So if something's going on, I want to know so we can figure out how to manage it. And then just the transparency, right? And asking, and I will ask lots of questions. Why are we doing that? What does that mean? And setting some boundaries about what we're trying to do to make sure that it's not overwhelming and achievable. So in terms of my frustrated high stress, yes, I can be super reactive. I can be, oh my gosh, but I have learned to recognize that reactivity and to recognize also that you just have to move past it and become solutions focused. So during the pandemic, I would say we had to do a lot of that. Every Friday, we would have a guest,
speaker from the governor's office who would certainly change things every Friday. And so you just had to learn how to roll with it, and you kind of came to expect it. And I would say that those high stress days become normalized. And I think as a professional over time, I've gotten better with that. One of the interesting things I did was during RIHIL, I took a EQI, which is like an emotional quotient assessment. And they said that I actually do really well with high stress. I stay emotionally intact, and that probably makes sense given all the emergency management stuff we've had to deal with. But the downside of that is that you don't always, or at least for me, I don't always tag when I'm experiencing a lot of chronic stress and the impacts it has on me. So I have personally had to really kind of reflect on that and figure out how to make sure that I am not sacrificing myself at the behest of work. So I think the new motto is, if you say yes to something, you're saying no to something. And so I'm really trying to not say no to my family and put them first. So I've learned a lot in this space. Okay.
So another multi-part question. So not to be surprised, I will ask each question. Please answer each separately, and I can go back and re-ask if needed. So with recent events that just occurred over the weekend, it's a reminder that we are always aware of our mission and vision in public health to strongly center around and promote health and racial equity. What do you think are the most important actions for BCPH to take to advance health and racial equity, as well as social justice more broadly in our community? And what kind of transformative change do you think those interventions would or could create?
Yeah, so it feels like the recent events that happened in Jacksonville, I think it was yesterday, it's just a reminder, and it's not just Jacksonville, it's other events that have happened, are just a reminder of all the challenges that we face in this country. We are definitely in a very interesting times. I do want to recognize that there are a lot of programs in the agency that do this work, that they are doing a lot of social justice work more broadly. And I think it's good that we're committing internally as an agency to commit to this work, because I see that's where the transformation is actually going to occur, is that once we do this internal work, we're going to be an army of advocates working with community to really start to move things in the community. So the first thing I actually would like to do is advance our health and racial equity and social justice more broadly in the community by having some agency declarations. So for example, we're about to have our strategic priorities finalized. And I think that we should have declarations to our community about what our priorities are and why we're prioritizing them, because I think it's really important for the community to hear that. And then there is a number of other declarations that we need to declare around reproductive justice, LGBTQ plus and trans rights, climate justice, youth mental health. There's a lot happening in the harm reduction space, universal home visitation. There's a lot of spaces that we're working where I feel like we need to be a little bit more explicit about what it is public health does with the community. And we don't want this to be performative, right? We want this to be transformative. So the second thing that I would want to do is, once the strategic priorities are developed, I'd like to take a closer look and see which one of these need to be centered in community, because we can't do this work alone. This work has to be done with community, helping to drive it. And then I do think there's a lot to do in the community engagement side. And so one of the things I would like to see is for us to have a blueprint of community engagement. So we have some programs that do community outreach events, which are like these one-time touch points. I know the immunization team will do a community outreach event at the Dia de Muerto, and they'll have a presence there, but that's not true authentic community engagement. And so I think when it comes to these larger, more complex issues, when I think about like climate justice, I do think that we need to have kind of a deeper, richer blueprint of how we do this work. What are the systems and structures that we need to set up? What are the models that we need to use? So we could use models like the collective impact framework, the shared leadership framework, but there's different ways that we can do it. And the blueprint would actually help us figure out which programs are working where in the community and would help us to have make sure that we're not tapping into the same community members. And then how do I know that this type of transformative change would, what it would create? Well, I think we've been incredibly successful in the opioid work. So, we started the opioid, what was it called? The OHE? I can't remember, but it was the precursor to the Substance Use Advisory Group. And it was because we were seeing a serious opioid epidemic. We saw the numbers increase in 1 year, it doubled, and we knew that we were having some major challenges. And so we brought all the partners together from law enforcement and the district attorney's office, and we created the Substance Use Advisory Group. And that group has been highly successful. It was built on the collective impact framework and a shared power framework. So it centered the voices of those who were most impacted. And it was led more by community and community groups. And what happens is when you do that is that they have ownership over that work. And so then they help to carry the work. It's not just public health carrying this work. We're very limited in resources and capacity. So that team has, not only did they win a NACO award, but they helped to drive a lot of policy and legislation across the state. And we should be very proud of that. So that is a way that I know that we can do this work with community and recognize this and see the transformation. And I'm really heartbroken because I think we do have a lot of challenges ahead of us in public health. I think we're very lucky to be in Boulder County, but at the same time, we still have our own issues that we need to face.
Okay, so now we're going to transition out to the audience. Who's going to ask you a few questions. For those who have questions, please just remember to provide your name, pronouns, and your title.
Okay, I have question number 4. And my name is Carla, and I'm the support for CDM, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. How do you decide when you need to dive into details versus when to step back and create and cultivate space for staff leadership?
Thank you, Carla, for CDM. I would say that this is an area where my philosophy, I should say, for this is to work with the team to set up initial goals and kind of boundaries and capacity to figure out how we're going to take on something new, but then to really move out of that. So I think I shared this in my first interview. I do consider myself kind of an architect, where my job is just to help and support and figure out and get refined on the goals that we're trying to accomplish, but then let the team who are the experts and empowering the team who are the experts to take on and implement the work. That is super important because I don't want to try to push my agenda when I may not know everything that they know, right? And then frankly, it doesn't work, right? When you try to push your agenda, it just doesn't work, especially with our team. I would say that is kind of how I know how to dive into the details early on, but then step back and cultivate that space for leadership. I also am there to support staff to take leadership roles. So through COVID, when we were dealing with everything that we were dealing with, and we had so many people, there was no way that I could be in all the details. We have to trust our staff to be able to manage a situation or an issue on their own. And we have to acknowledge how smart and brilliant and bright they are. So I think, I'm there just to ask questions, but I'm not there to necessarily meddle once they get moving with the implementation. I hope that makes sense.
I have question number 5. Carol Hellwig, she, her pronouns, and in the Communicable Disease Division. So this question is a 2-part with a intro. Local communities increasingly face complex, multifaceted challenges. As one example, in Boulder County, even though we have a housing first approach, we see many of the unhoused caught in a vicious cycle that may be related to substance use disorder, mental illness, and housing instability. What kinds of tools or skills do you use to develop a public health approach to complex issues like this? And what kinds of questions would you ask to illuminate our role in this work compared to other partners?
Okay, another complex question. I'm glad I had some time to reflect on it. Thank you for that. So I would say that the challenge that is presented in that question is actually a challenge that we're dealing with here locally. So the timeliness of this question is really good. It definitely requires us to have some adaptive leadership, which just definitely recognizes that there are some systemic issues that are potentially intersecting, and it's very complex. So basically what that means is there's not going to be a one solution fits all kind of approach to this. I do think I have been successful with dealing with these complex challenges with using the collective impact framework. I do think that's a really good framework to use. The cool thing that I just read about was that they have updated the framework. It was originally launched in 2011. It was used in Canada for poverty, to address poverty. And when you have really complex issues like that, you need something that's going to help to kind of frame the issue and bring everybody together. But they updated it recently to include health and racial equity. So I think that that is a really nice framework that could help us. And I think the other thing that we have going for us in Boulder County is we're super collaborative. This is one of the most collaborative communities I've ever worked in. And so it's kind of easy to get partners to the table. I think that the power sharing model that we also have, we have to get out of this system of going to community and saying, what do you think? I've developed this vision, and really start moving to the community to co-create the vision, because they have to be part of the solution. And so I think using those two together is really effective. In terms of the questions that we need to ask as a public health agency, I think there's some short-term questions, there's some longer-term questions. One of the first things I would want to know is, what's the public health role, right? What is our role? How do we intersect with harm reduction, with primary prevention, with teens and young adults, with home visitation support for pregnant individuals who might be unhoused, with meth addiction and the work around housing that Bill's been doing with the meth addiction. We need to really ask ourselves, what's our public health role? I would also want to know, in the short term, how come the unhoused are not going to the shelter? Has anyone asked them why they don't go to the shelter? I hear stories of, females who are unhoused feeling very unsafe about going to the shelter. I hear stories about people with dogs and their pets, that they can't bring them to the shelter. So we need to have a better understanding and center the voices of those who are unhoused and have mental health challenges and substance use disorders to understand what their circumstances look like. I would say longer term, one of the things that I've been thinking about is the need to stop pulling people out of the river and really going upstream and figuring out what are the root causes. If people are experiencing adverse childhood experiences, trauma, what are the root causes of why we're seeing people downstream? And I have a belief that we keep pulling people out of the water downstream, but if we don't start going upstream and looking at those systems challenges, we're really not going to be successful in changing what the experience is like for people. And then I would also want to know, how does the community view the solutions with, there's a lot of work around isolation and the community, the Surgeon General's report, and the community feeling like isolation is contributing. So there's a lot of questions to figuring out kind of the long-term approaches. And then lastly, I would want to just recognize that we are just part of someone else's collective impact work that they are centering, because in public health, we have snippets of mental and behavioral health. We have snippets of working with the unhoused, but this is not an area that we are actually the ones who are responsible for. And so we are there to provide expertise on meth exposure, to provide expertise on harm reduction, primary prevention, community trainings, things like that. But we're not necessarily the leaders in this work. We're significant contributors, is my view of that. And if we wanted to be leaders in this work, we would need significant resources to be able to lead. And I don't know that we have those. So thank you. That's a hard question. Okay.
All right, I have question number 6. Hi, Indira. Jordan Bullard, him, his site projects and vital records program manager. The question is, what would you say are your leadership styles, and how would staff see them in action in different situations?
Okay. Well, my philosophy has always been that if you want to be a good leader and lead people through change, or just lead people in general, you have to be a reliable and dependable manager. So you really have to kind of commit to supporting people every day. And it is a role of this manager and moving into a leader to have people understand the values of the agency, to live the values, to being able to see the mission, see themselves as part of the mission of the agency. And then as a leader, you're helping to shape not only the culture, but then shaping the vision for the future, right? So it does require all of us. And in order to get people to follow you into that future vision, you have to have that everyday experience where people want to support moving in that direction. And that requires empowering people, letting people do their work, being there to support them as needed, creating opportunities for people to try new and creative work. And then I would describe my management style as being supportive, empowering, inclusive, fun, and caring. And I would describe my leadership style most of the time. I'm a servant leader. I was telling Keith the other day, like, part of my job is just to get out of the way, let people do their jobs, I'm there to support them. But sometimes you can't always be a servant leader, especially leading in crisis. You tend to have to be a little bit more directive in ways that you normally don't operate, like that's not your comfort place. But when you're dealing with crisis, you have to start making decisions. And so there are times when you have to flex your leadership muscle and move in different directions. I also think it's important for people to have accountability for their behaviors, words, and actions. And so, and just being able to uphold the values of the agency, so we're all upholding them together. And I think the leadership example that I wanted to share in COVID is we definitely did not micromanage teams. We supported people as needed, checked in regularly. We adapted and pivoted as much as we needed to. And we built a very high functioning team, and we had some of the best outcomes in the state, actually. And I think part of that is because we centered on equity, we centered on priority populations, and we made the best decisions that we could at the time. But we always work to ensure that people who have the highest risk were being treated first. And so I would say that that's important leadership skill as well, is getting people to focus on the priority populations that are impacted the most. I hope that did it. Good, Jordan. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hi, Indira. I'm Dalia Mohammed, and I am she, her, hers, and my title is Administrative Specialist for the Strategic Initiatives Branch. And the last question is, in our last couple of minutes, is there anything else you would like to share with us?
Thank you, Dalia. I feel like doing this position would be a real privilege. It would definitely be a culmination of all my experiences, particularly at Boulder County Public Health over the last 9 years. And I'm really wedded to this agency and to building this agency culture. I didn't get to talk about this a lot, but I have been doing a lot of equity work for a long time. I was at the state health department. I helped to build their first health equity framework. We published papers in the American Journal of Public Health. We helped to get some work done we did the first LGBT strategic plan for the state health department. I did that with Dr. Urbina. I helped to form the Metro Denver Partnership for Health Equity Work Group, and then working with Heather and some others from the Metro Denver area, we actually helped to create a guidebook for health equity for local public health, and that guidebook was turned into a training at the Rocky Mountain Public Health Training Center. So I feel like the work that we have done with equity, particularly during COVID, has really shown that we have made a significant difference in our community. And I feel very excited to have the opportunity to be able to bring this to the whole agency. And I'm just super grateful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you all.
Well, thank you so much,
Okay.
Indira. Those are all of our questions.
Thank you.
So I know you're not doing the tour today.
Yeah.
But we do have refreshments out in the hallway. While you collect yourself, and our audience members can meet you out there and ask you any other questions, or you can chat with them for a little while.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Indira.
Thanks to everyone online too.
What time is the next one?
At 12:30.
12:30.
I thought it
All right. Welcome, everybody, again to the Boulder County Public Health Town Hall with our Deputy Director finalists. So I'm going to go through and do a quick introduction about what we're talking through, and then we will get started. Okay, so we have 7 questions with 1 intro question. The 7 questions will focus on leadership, community engagement, health equity, and workplace culture expectations. To keep on track, Amanda will be helping us. We suggest pacing between 5 to 6 minutes per question, and we've provided a copy of those to you for easy viewing as we're going. Some of the questions, as you may have noticed, are multiple part. So please take the time to review, reflect, and pause. We built time in for that. And we'll make sure to point out what it is, the multi-part. Sure. I will ask some questions, and then staff in the audience will ask. If you have a question and you're in the audience, please remember to introduce yourself with pronouns and titles, which reminds me, I'm Catherine Palmer. I am the Director of Admin and Finance. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be conducting the town hall today. So a few reminders before we get started. We are doing a hybrid, as you can tell. Please be mindful of the camera if you have to walk across. For those of you that are hybrid, please remember to keep your cameras off. Again, we have a technical problem with one of the cameras or one of the monitors here. And so if your camera is on, it makes it flash the entire time. So we appreciate you having your camera off. Just another reminder for those that are in the room, the mic is super hot. So those on camera will hear any side chatter or other noises. So if you do have a conversation, please take it to the hallway. Please mute and put away any phones. Again, please feel free as many times as you need to go to the hallway. We will have a 15-minute break afterwards. Most importantly, in line with our values, please set aside any implicit bias you may have and listen openly with the intent to what our candidate has to share with us today. After today's town hall, you will receive a link to complete a feedback form. So with that, we'll start with the very first introduction type question, which is, can you please introduce yourself? Briefly tell us what interests you about this role with Boulder County and how your background prepared you for it.
So my name is Julie Heller. My pronouns are she and her, and my background is I am Hispanic. My maiden name is Hernandez, or Hernandez for those who speak Spanish, and my married name is Heller. And then what has prepared me for this particular job? I grew up in poverty in San Antonio, Texas. It's a predominantly Hispanic community that I grew up in, and I definitely understand how the social determinants of health can impact you. My brother passed away from HIV. My sisters were teenage mothers, and my brother suffers from drug addiction and has been in and out of the criminal justice system and is currently in the criminal justice system now. So I definitely understand the impact that public health can have on one person. And then how I have basically developed myself and my background has prepared me. I have spent a long time developing myself through educational attainment, training, and also in my work experience. And I would summarize my work experience in 3 areas. I have management and leadership experience. I currently work at the Department of Public Health and Environment. And a leadership position, I worked in leadership positions at the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. Back in Boston. And then, so I have that management leadership experience. I have the employee experience. I went to law school. I focused on labor relations, and I worked on labor relations for a very long time, for almost 10 years. So I understand how to work with employees and making sure that employees have the resources and skill sets and development that they need in order to perform their job. And lastly, I look at impact. When I was in Boston working in state government, I worked on program effectiveness and program management. I took training at MIT on program effectiveness. So that's my background. I believe that background is very relevant to this position because overall there's a lot of change that you want to address with culture, equity. So I always look at it from a management leadership perspective, employee perspective, and then the impact perspective. And then as for why I'm interested in this particular position, I believe my skill set that I just described is relevant and would be helpful. And I believe I could help the team out in addressing or achieving its goals. I believe that the organization, the second reason why I'm interested in this job is Boulder is known for being very progressive. And in looking at a lot of the interview questions and the public information, there's alignment on the values, what I view as important is also important, not only to the public health, but also your leadership team, employees, and the community. And lastly, I am really excited to work with Dr. Nolan. I think it's rare that you see a public leader who has her experience. I'm not only seeing that she's saying she wants to do this work, but she has boots on the ground work where she has actually helped with equity. So I'd want to work with her for that reason. Second, I'm very data-driven evidence person, and I can see that she is too, just in looking at her LinkedIn profile and seeing all the great work that she's done. So I believe that in working with her and working with this team, we would be able to accomplish a lot. And that's why I'm excited about this position.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so our next question is a lengthy one. You did receive it in advance, so I've slightly shortened it for this space. It does have a few different parts to it, so I can go back and re-ask if needed. If you're appointed as deputy director, you will step into an agency with agreements around fostering trust, demonstrating compassion and respect, collaborating and building strong teams. We are also committed to being an anti-racist organization, which guides us to interrupt conversations or processes that are or may be rooted in bias and proactively support racial equity. How in your new role would you respond to and participate in positive disruption within our team? And how would you balance the need for agency cohesion and trust with the need to challenge each other in authentic ways?
Great question. First, I want to start off with saying that I normally don't speak this fast, but I have a very limited time period to answer these questions, and I want to be as comprehensive as possible. But if I were offered this position, I would speak slower and be a little bit slower on answering. So just want to explain that I'm not necessarily a fast talker. So first, I want to start out by saying I think it's fantastic and exceptional that this agency has a strong vision and aligned with culture, and that there's a value-based agreement. I'm sure it's taken a long time to create that agreement, so I'm glad that exists. Second, it aligns with the culture and values that I find important of fostering trust, compassion, respect, collaboration, and building strong teams. Those I think are really important in order to have a strong functional team. And then the other part is when you have a vision, the area where you have disruption is when it comes to implementation of how do you actually change those behaviors. And I also want to acknowledge that historically, addressing bias and equity has been a longstanding issue with American or US history. So it's not something that is just going to happen automatically, or that I think it's going to be easy to address. I think we need to work together as a team to address it. So some of the things that I'm going to address, I don't have access to all your information, but if I were offered this position, I'd work to see, how can we work together and piecing something together where we can actually make change in our culture. So as for the question as how I respond to and participate in positive disruption within our team, again, I always approach things of looking at the management, leadership, employees, and then community impact. So in talking to each of those groups, I would want to understand the past, the present, and the future. So in the past, what have we done? In the present, what's going on? What are some of the issues, and where do we eventually want to go? And with each of those groups, I would want to understand what are some immediate implementation of changes that we can do versus a longer term where it's going to take more team building, more work in order to get the implementation. And also I would ask, are there any policies, practices aligned or not aligned with the direction we want to head, and trying to work with everyone, management, leadership, employees, and community on addressing how can we change those policies and our practices in order to align with our values. And then also having an open-ended question of, is there something I haven't asked that you really think we should be doing? And then collecting that information. I would also infuse in these conversations, want to have an evidence-based approach towards changing behavior. And there's a couple things, a couple areas I would want to look at. That's the U.S. Surgeon General's. In 2022, the U.S. Surgeon General released a framework for workplace mental health and well-being. I would want to see, can we incorporate some of those ideas, or some of those ideas already being implemented? And if they're not implemented, is there a reason, or is there something we can do to try to implement? I would also use the evidence-based approach of the Leadership Challenge book. And then the third evidence-based approach is Project Aristotle, which talks about how to create efficient teams. And I think that would also help in helping our team out. In the end, I would share this information and validate it with everyone, management, leadership, employees in the community, to make sure that the information that has been captured is accurately reflecting what has been said. Once it has, and we're all in agreement, or at least the majority are in agreement, we want to move along with an implementation plan and a timeline. As for how I would respond or how I would balance the need for agency and cohesion and trust, I would start with first really aligning or giving us that North Star, remembering, I think my experience with public health employees is that we're all very passionate about our work, but also aligning it to why equity is important, why addressing bias is important, so that we always have that North Star on why we're doing what we're doing. I would also want to add towards the value-based agreement and obviously working with a team of creating a common language, a common understanding of behaviors and leads. So right now there's definitions for the value-based agreement, but I would want definitions on bias and racial equity and also the impacts of bias and racial inequity. And then linking it towards behaviors that align with what is bias and what is not bias. What is racial inequity? What is racial equity? So people understand how their behaviors are aligned with that. And I would once again want to use evidence-based approaches. Professor David Hoffman from the Harvard Law School has, for instance, recently released it says, follow the science, proven strategies for reducing unconscious bias. So seeing, are we doing some of those behaviors to make sure that we're addressing bias? And then lastly, aligned with this, would want to champion to address each area. So I'm running out of time, so I'm going to talk a little bit faster. As for interrupting the conversation, it has to be from a place of learning. I definitely understand the discomfort, and it drives me crazy too when these incidents occur and you kind of get caught in the headlights, or you also, it's almost like a fight or flight. I want it to be a sense of, do we have a learning environment? Maybe creating that, I don't know if anyone has heard of the ouch oops, but maybe doing something similar to that, but calling it the cultural check. If someone says something where they're offended, that person can say, I want to do a cultural check. The impact of your statement is X. And then the person who made that statement, they can say how they can address the impact of that. Obviously, if it's a repeat offender, would have to address that with working with HR or doing more training so that person fully understands how their behaviors are not acceptable and don't align with our culture. And lastly, I would want to acknowledge our organization for the work that we're doing based on the cadence of this organization, whether it's quarterly, semi-annually, or annually, sharing what has been done, what's working well, what's not working well, how can we address those areas that are not working well, and also bring in the community to say, we see some of your changes, they are working well or they're not working well, but I always grounded it on the community, on saying what they see and how we can improve ourselves. So that's how I would balance that. Sorry for the fast talking.
You appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so this next question is to tell us a little bit more about working with you. It does have 3 parts, and I'll ask each of them. Please answer each separately, and again, I can go back and re-ask if needed. If we were given a manual on how to best work with you, what would it say? What would the section on working with you when you're frustrated and high stress say? And what would the section on your best day say?
Give me a second just to make sure I capture this.
Yep.
So if we were given a manual on how to best work with you, what would it say? I would say, and I think probably my answer to the first question is, I'm very data driven. So I want to not only hear your opinion on the direction you might want to go or improvements you might want to have, but I would also want you to back up your statements with data if the data is available. I know data is not always available or the evidence isn't always available. Second, I'm very organized, so I would want the team also to be organized. And if the team isn't organized, I would create systems the way I currently do on keeping us organized. So there's a lot of stuff going on, especially in this position where there's over 20 programs. So unless there's already a system in place, I would create a system in place where I would want to know your program, the data, what you're asking for, and then trying to create that change or how you might need me to help you. And then I'm also a person who listens. I might come to a situation where I have opinion, but I'm not a person who's like rigid, that I do not change my opinion. I listen to what people have to say, and that it's evidence, data-driven, or if that's not there, if there's other compelling reasons, maybe the community is saying this is really what they need, then let's try to work together in order to make that change. So I think data-driven, collaborative, listening, and organized is probably the manual on how to work with me. As for a section when I'm frustrated or highly stressed, I think I always acknowledge that when I'm stressed, I want to come to the situation by acknowledging that I'm stressed. No one's perfect. Everyone has a lot of stressors. And I know when you are stressed or frustrated, you might not appear or present yourself the way you want to. So I tend to say to people, if I am stressed or frustrated, I might say, I'm frustrated because of this. Can you help me? And sometimes a person might say, I'm equally as frustrated and stressed. Let's try to get through this together. So I think it just depends. I approach it not as I'm a person who's perfect, but as a person who's human and wanting other people to see me as being a human. And what I've realized, the higher up you go in leadership, you're sort of seen as a different person. And I don't want that. I want it to be more of a collaborative position where it's sort of, I'm frustrated, they might be frustrated. How can we get through the stress together? On my best days, the best days are really about celebration for all the work that we do. Just to give you one example, we applied for a grant with the CDC. We desperately needed money. I'm sure people can understand that frustration. And our grantees were running out of funding too. Some had already run out of funding, and we were asking for more funding. And I always say aim for the stars. And if you don't get the stars, maybe you'll get something below the stars, but at least it's something. And we asked for a lot of funding from the CDC. They got back to us and they gave us $500K, which in the scope of some of the programs, it's not a lot of money, but it's something that I know is going to help the public. So it was really my best day. That was one of my best days because I was like, yes, we got the money. I told the manager, celebrated her with saying like, thanks to all your great work and your team's work, we were able to accomplish this. Further up the hierarchy, I expressed communications of saying like, let's congratulate Emily. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that word. Let's congratulate this employee for all this great work. And then also within our team, we celebrated her. And that is just a great feeling because you know people are putting in a lot of work and that you're actually getting results is sort of just like a great day because you know you're going to be serving the public. So that's my response to that question.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we have another multi-part question. Again, I'll ask the questions. If you can answer each separately, I can go back and re-ask if you need. With recent events, even that we saw occur over the weekend, we are always aware and reminded of our mission and vision in public health to strongly center around and promote health and racial equity. What do you think are the most important actions for VCPH to take to advance health and racial equity, as well as social justice more broadly in our community? And what kind of transformative change do you think those interventions would or could create?
Great. So this was a question I received in advance, so I don't have to take the time to write down the notes. So as for the most important actions for Boulder County Public Health to take to advance health and racial equity, as well as social justice more broadly in our community, I always start with learning from people in the past who have been successful. And that one individual who I've always seen as how can I learn from him is John Lewis, the civil rights leader and American politician. And I'm happy to say I shared this in the first interview. I serendipitously met him. And I remember shaking his hand and just being so thrilled that I got to meet someone like that who's made such an impact in changing America and changing my life and other people of color. But the way I would start out is taking what John Lewis said, which he said, if you see something, you have to speak up. You have to be a headlight. So I'd want to shine a light on what are we doing as an organization as it relates to our programs and as it relates to our culture, and sharing that, understanding it from management leadership, understanding it from employees, and understanding it from community. And the point of sharing is that I would want to hear from them of maybe the community says, well, this is your culture, but in reality, it doesn't really reflect, and then taking that feedback and making it better. I'd also want to shine a light on disparities on where they are occurring and the location of where they're occurring with a social epidemiology perspective, mainly because what I've seen when you just share the data on showing the disparities, the bias narrative continues. People will say, well, they're doing bad because they're lazy or whatever discriminatory views people have. But if you have that social epidemiology lens, then people start seeing why those communities are struggling. Maybe that community is struggling because they have a poor health system, they have poor educational system, they have a poor environment, they don't have parks, et cetera. I think when people start seeing that lens of social epidemiology, the bias narrative goes away. So I'd want to shine a light on that. And then also listen to management, leadership, employees, and community on what they see as the disparities are and what they see as some of the issues are occurring. And then the third area I would want to shine a light is where is the funding going as it relates to community services? Is it going to those priority populations and the people of need? And then again, wanting to hear from those three perspectives: management, leadership, employees, and the community, making sure that the funding is appropriately used to serve those priority populations. As for the type of transformative change I think those interventions could or would create, the first part of the transparency on the programs and transparency on our culture is really kind of addressed it earlier, really addressing those three components of making sure that we are improving, making sure that we have that direction of are we achieving our goals or not achieving our goals, and getting input from all three groups. As for the data on disparities and then also the social epidemiology information, overall, I would want to see over time that the numbers are improving, and the numbers are not improving. Why is that? And again, getting that feedback from management, leadership, employees in the community, they might be able to say, well, there's a barrier, there's an access issue, you need to change policy, you need to change procedures, whatever it might be in order for us to actually change things. And then as for where the funds are flowing, really thinking about internally, are we using our funds appropriately in order to really help those communities, but are we also seeking other funds? I know getting funding from the federal government or state government is not easy because there's all sorts of requirements, but is there some areas we might try to seek funding? And if there isn't areas where we can seek funding, how can we work with the community? They might be able to advocate for us on seeking more funding or policy changes. And I believe that overall would help us be a better organization in trying to impact and have a public health impact. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to transition out to our audience. We already had some of the questions. So just a reminder, if you do have a question, please provide your name, your pronouns, and your title for your question.
I have the first one. My name is Allison. I use she, her, hers. I'm in the community health division. I manage our community substance abuse prevention program. How do you decide when you need to dive into details versus when to step back and create and cultivate space for staff leadership?
Second to think about this one. So first I want to start with saying my philosophy on employee staff leadership. I see myself as not being the expert. I see the individuals for their programs as being the expert leaders. So I would rely on those individuals to be the expert leaders to do the work that they need to do. As for diving in, I don't think I would be a person that I know I'm not a person who micromanages. I believe that you are the expert, you are the leader. I trust you until that trust is lost. And I must say, in my time at working at CDPHE, I have not lost trust in any of my managers. If anything, I believe they're stellar employees, and I really love them for the great work that they do. As for when I would have to dive in, I've noticed it when there's hiccups where maybe a community partner might complain. I think it's different here because obviously working in state government, the complaints usually go to the governor and it trickles down to us. And that's where I have to dive in of saying, like, let me see all the data, all the information, and then I present it to senior leadership saying, like, nothing has happened here that is inappropriate or wrong. The data is showing, and all the information that we have is showing that we did the right thing. The person is upset for X, Y, or Z. So that's when I dive in. The other time I dive in is when we get something new. So for instance, legislative change just occurred that requires us to produce a report. So I've been very hands-on because I know this report is going to go to the legislature. It's going to have to be approved by the governor. So I have to be very involved to make sure that it's not that I don't trust the employees, it's that I know I'm going to get questions from senior leadership and I have to be able to answer those questions. And the other time I dive in is when the employee themselves tells me, I need help me dive into the information, and then I do. So it just depends on when it's needed. I always try to be a person who helps. And again, I truly believe that I trust employees to do the work because they are the experts. There's 20 plus programs here. There's no way I'm an expert on all those programs. Yep. So that's how
Yeah, why? I was the only one.
Yeah, and you know, John and IT are over there, and they were just like, "Oh no, it's
Sorry about that. It's okay. Not a problem. I definitely understand virtual meetings, and sometimes people talk and they don't realize they're talking or that they want to contribute. And if the person wants to contribute, definitely understand. So that's how I view that. When I step back versus when I go into detail and creating and cultivating a space of staff leadership. The other thing I want to say with staff leadership, I think people are at various spectrums of their life. Some people are great leaders. They might be new to their position and they might need more help, while other people know exactly what they're doing. They're probably going to have to help me on understanding their positions. But it is whether you're at the beginning or you're at advanced stage of your career, if you need help in developing a particular area, or you want more training or what have you, I'm always willing to work with employees on making sure that they get the development that they want. Because I know at the end of the day, I'm a person who constantly wants to be learning, because there's a lot to be learned in public health, but any individual on helping them delve in on training, I would help them with that.
Understandable. Personnel manager, she, her, hers. And I have question 5, which is a little long and has multiple parts. Local communities increasingly face complex, multifaceted challenges. As one example, in Boulder County, even though we have a housing first approach, we see many of the unhoused caught in a vicious cycle that may be related to substance abuse disorder, mental illness, and housing instability. What kind of tools or skills do you use to develop a public health approach to complex issues like this? And what kinds of questions would you ask to illuminate BCPH's role in this work compared to other partners?
Thanks. This is another question I received ahead of time, so I don't need to think about it. So as for the kind of tools or skills that I would use to develop a public health approach to complex issues, first, I just want to acknowledge that homelessness is a very complex issue, especially as income inequality continues to rise. Homeless rate is going up. In fact, I received an email today about training for homelessness from the U.S. Department of HUD, basically talking about some interventions that they want. But the interesting part was that Biden wants to reduce homelessness by 25% in the next 2 years. And that's a pretty aggressive goal, but I'm interested in learning more about that perspective. But homelessness overall is a very complex issue. So the skills that I would bring is one, that I have a passion for this type of work. I'm committed to working on many of these issues. Again, my personal narrative is that my father struggled with mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness issues, and it makes me think about public health. It had been addressed early in his life when he was a teenager. Maybe his life would have been different, but he didn't have those interventions. So later on in life, trying to help him, it was just very, very difficult, especially as he got into harder and harder drugs as he aged. So it's a very difficult process to address, but I personally am passionate about this type of work. As for the other skill set I mentioned, I've developed myself through education, training, experience, and then just talking to people and learning as much as I can. So I'm constantly learning in order to think about how can I implement and make change. I'm very solutions focused while being realistic. I think a lot of times what I see is there are some proposals that are not realistic based on the realities that we work on, but yes, I want to aim for the stars, but I also want to think about the reality of what we work in, our budgets, our employees, our staffing, etc. I have great organizational skills. I've mentioned some of those organizational skills earlier. Listening and communication skills. I truly believe that you have to listen to people, and you also have to not only listen, but document what they're saying, and then coming back to them and saying, we've listened to what you said. We try to implement what you said. We weren't able to implement what you said because of regulations, policies, etc. but always having that communication. And then collaboration and inclusive skills, I definitely believe that you need to include everyone in the table, because if you don't, usually what I've seen is something gets implemented and then you find out we should have done X, but we didn't do X because we didn't talk to those people. So it's very important that you're inclusive and collaborative. So those are sort of my management, leadership, and community engagement skills. As for the tools that I would use, first I would start with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Public Health 3.0. That's a tool that I think is very important of looking at meso, macro, and micro levels of addressing partnerships. And when I first heard of this, I was like, how in the world is public health going to do this? It's very important to have those partnerships so you're addressing at each level. As for my oversight of operations tools, I have evaluation skills. I know data and evaluation. I have policy, regulatory, legislative tools of understanding those components. And then I have budget tools of understanding how do you work on budgets. And then strategic planning skill tools. I know how to create the goals, work on creating combined goals, looking at the progress, and then giving updates on where we're going with those goals. As for what questions I would ask to illuminate Boulder County's public health role in this work compared to other partners, and again, looking at the Public Health 3.0 perspective, I want to understand internally within Boulder County Public Health, I want to understand from the 20+ programs, where are we on that spectrum of Public Health 3.0? And then looking at where we are at, I'd also want to understand where are there access and barrier issues, what policies, legislative changes are needed, and how can our partners work with us to address those issues, and then what budget or additional funding can we seek. So it's almost like creating a chart of like, where are we and where are there gaps and what can we do to address those gaps. I would also ask how we're connecting internally and externally to others to have a more comprehensive approach to help clients and communities. So if we're not connecting internally or externally, why is that? And try to build those relationships so that we are working more collaboratively. And then lastly, the other question I would ask is when clients are being sent to services with our partners, are they actually using those services? And if they're not using those services, what are the barriers and access issues that those clients have? So we're sending a client, I don't know, to Longmont and they live here, that's going to be an access issue. So those are some of the questions I would have. So overall, I would be a partnership mapping of understanding what we're doing, what the partners are doing, where are their gaps, and where can we work together to be more comprehensive in serving the public. Thanks.
Julie, my name is Rita, and I provide administrative support for the organization. Pronouns are she, her. And the question is, what would you say are your leadership styles, and how would staff see them in action in different situations?
Give me a second. This is a question I did not receive ahead of time, so I just want to pull something that I addressed earlier. So my leadership styles are very much based on the Leadership Challenge book. And the reason I love this book is because it is evidence-based. I think you're probably hearing a common theme of evidence is very important to me. But it talks about having a shared vision, which I believe the first question was really about the vision that we would have for the culture here, and then the vision of public health, which is addressing bias and addressing equity. So I want to make sure that employees feel that they understand the shared vision, that we're all contributing to that shared vision, and we're all trying to achieve the goal of the shared vision. The second leadership aspect or leadership style is I believe that you should challenge the process. I have noticed in my prior experience that some employees or even some managers or even some people in the leadership team don't want to challenge because they feel afraid to challenge, or they don't feel they're safe to challenge, or that there might be negative consequences. I want to hear that challenge because to me, the more feedback you get, the more you can think about how can I improve. So I want people to challenge the process, especially as we're aiming towards addressing bias and health equity. The third leadership style is that I want to enable others. I just mentioned earlier of sort of individuals who are at various spectrums of their life, of how do I enable them to accomplish what they want to accomplish. At the end of the day, especially if you look at the U.S. Surgeon General's framework for employee mental health and well-being, a key component is that people feel that they're contributing, and I want people to feel that they're contributing by enabling them when they need to be enabled. So if it's training, or they feel that, you know, I really want to be in this position, or really want to contribute to X, how can I help them get there? So I want to enable people. And then encouraging others, that's another leadership style that I have. I know working in government is not easy. I think in public health, we are very passionate about the work we do, and sometimes it can be daunting, stressful, frustrating, as we addressed earlier. But I want to encourage people when we do have those wins, and also just acknowledge that it is hard doing this work, but at the end of the day, we feel good about what we're doing because we're trying our best. So I would encourage others by talking to them, celebrating their wins, and also probably crying when we do need to cry on sad things. And then modeling the way is my last style. Is I truly believe that I know one of the values here is trust, that if you say something and you don't model the way, you lose trust. And getting people's trust back is very, very difficult. So I would model the way with a caveat saying we're not perfect, I'm not perfect, and understanding and giving me grace when I do stumble, that I'm trying my best. So that's how people would see my leadership style in different situations.
Okay, number 7, my name is Dahlia. I use she, her, hers, and I am the Strategic Initiatives Admin Specialist. And the question is, in our last couple of minutes, is there anything else you would like to share with us?
Give me a minute to think about that one, because that's a new question. I think the last thing I would like to say is, one, thank you everyone for being here. I know everyone has things to do, and I'm not even certain how many people are online, but even if you think of all the people that are here, it's a lot of resources that are spending their time to be here. So I really appreciate that. I'm extremely excited about this position, and I hope I conveyed that today. I'm excited for the reasons I stated. I believe I have a skill set. I'm excited about this organization because it's progressive, it has values, and I want to work with your leadership team. I think the one thing I probably haven't addressed is sort of my ability to be resourceful and innovative. I can tell you what, when I worked back in Boston in state government, I got my master's of public administration. This is where I really learned of the power of evidence and data. And I really wanted to have a program effectiveness initiative. And I was able to, and this is me just being resourceful and passionate about the work that I wanted to do. I went to the commissioner that would be like a person at Lexi's position and said, this is something we need. I see that you have these values. It aligns with their values. The person agreed and I implemented it. Although I had no resources, I had no budget. It was like, you can implement, but you're sort of on your own. And the resourcefulness on my part was really looking to see like, who can I partner with to help me? And MIT Janelle Poverty Action Lab, they had a state and local innovation award, and I had to convince people internally within the organization of understanding why this is important and why we should do it. And I was able to get people from IT, programs, employees, community leaders to agree to this. So we submitted a grant, we got the funding, and then we then started to implement, but then I was, as usual, you always need more funding. So then I saw that there was a USDA Performance Technology and Improvement Grant. And I wanted to apply for this grant. And this just gives you a sense of me being innovative and passionate. I was told by the leadership I could not apply. And I just like felt frustrated and stressed of like, I don't understand why they don't want to apply. I went back to the drawing board, looked at the information. the reason they said no is they had the criteria in the past versus the new criteria. And I went back, was very diplomatic and said, can we talk about it again? Here's the criteria. I think this is why it would work. And they said, yes. We applied and again, having to get all those resources together to get people to say, yes, I want to submit this application. Again, it required internal, external. We had researchers from MIT, we had researchers from Brown University saying we're going to help on this initiative. And we applied for the PTIG grant and we did get the grant. And overall, I was able to get almost $1 million in funding for this initiative. But I think this tells you sort of the drive and initiative when, started from nothing to how can I align with various partners to get to what we want? Because at the end of the day, I truly believe that this initiative would help our programs really serve the public and would have an impact on the public. And for me, having an impact on the public is important because I personally know the value that when you are poor and you have nothing, that these programs really help lift you up in various ways on whatever issues you may have. So growing up, I relied on Upward Bound, which is a program to help people who are in poverty get into college. And I know how that program lifted me up. So that's why I have that drive of being innovative and creative and working with people in order to accomplish or try to accomplish a goal. Thanks.
All right, thanks very much, Julie. So those are,
Thank you.
all of our questions for you today. So Jordan is going to take you on a tour momentarily, but like we shared with you before, we do have refreshments out there. So if you want to grab something, and everybody in here will go out there as well. So if you want to introduce yourself or have any, if they have any questions for you,
Sounds great.
ask me some. So thank you for spending some time with us today. Really appreciate it, getting to know you more.
Thanks for the virtual audience.
All right, wonderful. Thanks.